It seemed as though the parents were probably involved in it. And from what I've seen in the newspapers and heard on television, there had been snow all around the house. The ransom note supposedly was written inside the house. I thought this would be a fairly easy case. I thought it would be a slam dunk. And I even remember talking to my daughter. I kind of joked with her, saying that, if somebody did get in the house, it must have been Santa Claus coming down the chimney.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science on this second day of Christmas, maybe third depending on where you are in the world. I think Christmas is the first day, 26th is the second day. If it's the third day of Christmas, then my true love sent to me 3 French hens, 2 turtle doves and a partridge in a pet tree. At the beginning of this episode you heard Detective Lou Smith, who had like a extremely high success rate with his cases, and his very last case, the JonBenet Ramsey case, he was unable to solve. I personally think he was completely on the wrong track, but even he, I think, didn't know that when he eventually would sit down to interview John Ramsey, he would actually seriously ask him questions about Santa Claus. Although there is a silly aspect to this episode, there's also a serious aspect to it, and we will go from talking about the Santa Claus story and how it came about and who it was based on, and from there we will talk about the murder weapon, and there is actually a link between the two stories which we'll get to. For those of you that aren't on Patreon, there's a new episode on Burke Ramsey's Sodagate, and you can head on over there. It's Patreon/TCRS. But before we get to that, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe, ring the doorbell, ring the bell, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the Santa Claus theory is a real theory. Santa Claus is one of the suspects. It's obviously not the mythical Santa Claus. It's somebody who dressed up as Santa Claus called Bill McReynolds, who attended the Ramsey Christmas party on the 23rd of December. And there was actually an incident at that party as well where 911 was called and it was a dropped call. Now, as I say, this episode links up with a following episode dealing with the murder weapon. That's also something which there's a lot of uncertainty about, and we will be going through that, but taking the lead from this particular episode. So Bill McReynolds was a Santa Claus for hire at the time. He was around about 67 years old when the Ramseys had their Christmas that fateful year, and he'd also been Santa Claus, I think, for 2 preceding years as well, so he was certainly not a new Santa in terms of the Ramseys. I wasn't joking earlier when I referred to Detective Lou Smith, who was one of the interrogators when John Ramsey gave his interview, and he literally did ask him about Santa Claus and whether Santa Claus could be a suspect, and Santa Claus is also mentioned as a suspect in John Ramsey's book. And I think when John Ramsey appeared on CNN, I'm not quite sure which channel it was, but Katie Couric asked him about the book, saying, you pepper the book with fleeting references to other people. You talk about Bill McReynolds, who played Santa at your Christmas party, and John Ramsey answers, the point in the book was to clarify from our viewpoint why these people have been mentioned a lot in the media, and also to point out that they are legitimate leads that need to be followed. And then Couric responds, but the Santa Claus was investigated and basically was dropped as a potential suspect. And John doesn't seem to like that. He sort of stutters and he says, that's true, then that's great. All I'm asking is the police to investigate all of the leads. So actually what happened, Bill McReynolds was investigated, and his alibi was his wife. His wife said that they were home, and so they were kind of off the hook because of the wife providing the alibi, but then you could also argue that that wasn't a reliable alibi. But interestingly, Bill McReynolds kind of emerged as almost the first suspect. As crazy as that sounds, he sort of emerged as one of the prime top suspects very early on, and he was sort of conflated with this idea of the old man who has access to children and is a pedophile. That was sort of the story. I don't want to go into too much detail, except to say the concerns from the police was the fact that this guy was quite feeble, and John sort of seemed to suggest that his feebleness was perhaps not real, that he was pretending to be feeble. But it's a matter of fact that Bill McReynolds died in 2002, so 5 years later. McReynolds was originally a former University of Colorado journalism professor, and what gave a little bit of credibility to the whole rumor, the whole conspiracy, was that his wife had written a play where a little girl had died in a basement. According to an article in Bustle, when he died in 2002, the Daily Camera emphasized that police officers never considered him or his wife. I guess Mrs. Claus, as crazy as that is, was also considered a suspect by the rumor mill, I guess, but the police never actually considered them suspects. And but this wasn't the end of the story. Because of the suspicion around him, he actually left town and moved to Cape Cod and kind of retired from being a Santa Claus. I think he left Boulder in 1998. So just a year essentially after what had happened. There's also quite an interesting story about what happened at the funeral, which was that Bill McReynolds attended the funeral and he handed Patsy a vial. I think it had some glitter, which JonBenet said it was fairy dust. She'd given it to him, and what he then said was he was giving the vial back to Patsy, and then he walked away without looking at her. And then Patsy sort of called out to him and said, "Santa, aren't you coming to the party next year?" And this is at the funeral. She's saying, at the funeral, aren't you going to be at the party next year? And then McReynolds answered, "That's not going to happen. He's retired. He's not going to do it again." And a lot of people at the funeral noticed this behavior, noticed there was a bit of a spectacle, and so those who were favorable towards the Ramseys kind of supported the fact that Santa is an oddball, and maybe something was going on with Santa. But you can turn it the other way and say that it looked like McReynolds suspected Patsy. That's why he sort of handed in his resignation effectively. And that brings us back to Detective Lou Smith, and he became something of a TV celebrity for a while. He sort of appeared in quite a few documentaries. You can see him here demonstrating how he enters the basement window. Obviously what's not present in the demo is the broken shards of window that he is entering. He's entering very, very snugly over that window, but there are no broken shards that he's got to be careful of. And what's also very interesting is that Lou Smith shows how easy and simple it is to get in through that window from that vantage point, from the garden from outside in, but he doesn't demonstrate trying to get out. He doesn't demonstrate climbing back out of that window. And so if you're going to imagine a guy like Bill McReynolds, who's even older than Lou Smith, you maybe not going to be convinced that an oldish guy is going to be able to pull this off. Besides the glass, there's also kind of a spider web that you would have to leave intact. In other words, if you're getting in the window and getting out, and it was barely wide enough for Lou Smith's hips, you would need to get back in and back out without, leaving the spider web intact. So, when you have something like this, what's almost natural is for people just to dismiss it out of hand, just to say it's silly and all that kind of thing, and it is, but it's also worth going to the trouble to actually play it through kind of in your mind, where you're not dismissing it out of hand, where you're actually going to play it through. And the reason why it is important to do is because you can then understand insights about something else. And what I mean is, if you imagine, in this case, Santa Claus, and I know it sounds absurd, but if you imagine Santa Claus really did come, he really was the intruder, then you are faced with a couple of questions. One of them is, okay, so was he dressed up as Santa Claus, right? And wouldn't you answer in this hypothesis, wouldn't you say yes? I mean, wouldn't he be dressed up as Santa because that's how JonBenet knew him? And there was this contention that she had her been attacked by someone that she was familiar with, someone that she trusted. When the person encountered her, she didn't scream, she didn't shout out. So whoever found her in her bedroom, she encountered this person and didn't cry out. So it had to be someone that she knew, right? So wouldn't you expect Bill McReynolds or Santa to appear as Santa? I mean, if he's appearing as himself, wearing some kind of, I don't know, blue overall or something, it's not going to be very charming. So wouldn't he be dressed up as Santa? Then you take it a bit further and you say, okay, so if he was dressed up as Santa, wasn't he wearing a red suit and boots and whatnot, and didn't he leave boot prints? So could he have left the high-tech boot print in the basement? What size were those boots? Also, what size were his boots? And then you look at, were there any red fibers from a red suit? Were there any white fibers from a white beard or whatever? And obviously there's none of those sort of traces, but you thinking in the right direction when you think sort of like that. And the vital point to come up with here is this whole idea of JonBenet not screaming when she encountered this assailant who spent a little bit of time with her. It sounds like he fed her or she fed herself, and then there was other things going on as well. JonBenet wasn't just instantly attacked and she died. There was kind of a process going on. One could even call it a game. One could call it you could even say that she was abducted for a short while and then killed. And the question is, why didn't she cry out while this was happening, right? And one of the reasons why Santa Claus kind of makes sense is it sort of fits that profile. But you then take Santa Claus out of it and you say, okay, it's a familiar figure, someone that she kind of would have trusted, and then who could that be? And then there's also the aspect, and this was sort of also debated, where someone would say, okay, could Bill McReynolds, could a sort of feeble Santa have been capable of the gymnastics of, staking out the house, hanging out there for as long as he did, writing the ransom note for as long as he did, running up the stairs, running down the stairs, basement stairs, whatever. And then also, did he have the actual capacity to execute this mortal blow on JonBenet? Was he strong enough to execute this blow on JonBenet? And then you kind of have a similar, it's like a cousin to this thinking, where you say, there were accusations that Burke Ramsey was too young and too small to sort of execute a blow with a torch, right? That's one of his own defenses as well. I think when he was on Dr. Phil, he said, I wouldn't have been strong enough to inflict a blow like that. And people have said that, and science has also said that. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. We will pick up in another episode dealing with the murder weapon, and we will indirectly be answering that question that's been posed right here. Thank you for listening. If you're not a member of Patreon, if you haven't gone over to Patreon, please do check it out. There are already around about 150 patrons on Patreon. Quite a lot of content there, and there'll be a lot more content on Patreon next year than on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do. I'll be putting up Chris Watts' What Do We Know? What Else Do We Know? Tomorrow, and the day after I will be putting up probably the discussion about the murder weapon. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the remaining 12 days of Christmas.